You are now tuned in to Conscientization 101, an online magazine combining reflection, music, and action through independent media.
In America, the capitalist system not only makes the people stupid, but keeps them arrogant in their stupidity. This stupidity in the country, this calculated stupidity, affects the African masses more because they read even less than the others. And they need to read more than the others. Our people suffer because they lack knowledge. At this stage of human development, one of the best ways to acquire knowledge indirectly is through reading.
Yo, I'm reading this new book, man. Yo, this shit is so deep, yo. Shit got my mind thinking about a whole new other format, man. You know what I'm saying?
Fuck a book, man. The book is fucking your head up, man.
Yo, when's the last time you read anything, man?
Never, motherfucker.
I'm flabbergasted, smart bastard. Why won't he play his role and just act retarded? Cause when you grow single parent poor, that's your place. Don't read too many books, sag your jeans through your face. Chat shit, act thick, practice your backflip. Poke your motherfucking arse out for the cameras. Provide the entertainment for your cultural betters. Men of letters think we could only be smart if they let us. No, knowledge ain't for punks, they market it like it is. Cause who the fuck wants to be Carlton from Fresh Prince? But geeks design the systems, the visions, the politicians, Malthus and the Smiths. We're living in their vision, so knowledge is power for devouring cowards that showered you with propaganda each and every hour. That's why Malcolm never died. It's just another dog on the road, a symbol over the globe. Cause did you know the most rebellious thing you can do is get educated? Forget what they told you in school. Get educated. I ain't saying play by the rules. Get educated. Get educated. Get educated. Get educated. Break the chains of their enslavement. Get educated, even if you're on the pavement. Get educated. What a weapon of your brain is. Get educated. Get educated.
All right, welcome to another edition of Conscientization 101 podcast. I'm your host, James Stone, a.k.a. the Iconoclast, a.k.a. the Dessalines Dream. That's right, baby, Dessalines Dream. And we got a great show for you today. How you doing over there, my co-host?
I'm fine. How are you today?
What's your name?
Zari.
Oh, okay. So are you an editor or are you just snuck in the studio?
No, I just kind of snuck in the studio.
All right, don't worry. All right, that's cool. Sneak in the studio. All right.
I'm a, what do you call it? A squatter.
You're a squatter. Oh, that's kind of appropriate. We talk about squatters because we're going to be talking about white folks in South Africa today.
Exactly. The ultimate squatters.
The ultimate squatter. All right, today on the show, we are going to be doing a really, really fascinating interview. We interviewed Dr. Julian Kunnie, and we talked about his book, Is Apartheid Really Dead? Pan-Africanist Working Class Cultural Perspectives. All right. Julian Kunnie, we talked to him. We're going to play excerpts from this interview. It was a 3-hour interview. So this is part 1 of a 2-part series. And all I got to say is Julian Kunnie, wait. Before I get more into Julian Kunnie and about the show and the highlights of the show, let's go into Dr. Julian Kunnie's bio, or vitae. Julian Kunnie is professor of religious studies classics at the University of Arizona. He is the author of 4 books: Models of Black Theology, Issues of Class, Culture, and Gender, Is Apartheid Really Dead? Pan-Africanist Working Class Cultural Critical Perspectives, Indigenous Wisdom and Power, Affirming Our Knowledge Through Narratives, with Nomalungelo Garuka, and his most recent publication, The Cost of Globalization, Dangers to the Earth and Its People. In addition, he has produced 2 educational DVDs, Umoja, The Spirit in Africa, and Black and Brown, An Afro-Latino Journey, which explores the ancient African presence in Mexico. He produced 2 DVDs in 2011, aided by Veronica Martinez, We Belong to Mother Earth, Dina Elder, Atali Jones Benelli Speaks, and the Global Indigenous Peoples Performing Arts Festival, from Pingtung, Taiwan, following his research visit to Taiwan and China in August 2011. He has delivered papers and lectures at colleges, universities, and communities on 6 continents. Kunnie is currently working on a prison research project that interrogates issues of race, class, and gender, and is geared toward preventing the incarceration of youth, particularly those of oppressed nationalities. He has visited Napierville Correctional Facility in Azania, that's South Africa, and San Quentin Correctional Facility in California for his research. He recently launched the Nyakweri Ecological Restoration and Preservation Project with Samuel Nakeda from Transamara, Kenya. That is concerned with studying the impact of global warming and climate change on the Nyakweri Forest Preserve. The project trains students in the areas of ecological sustainability through practical immersion and living in the Nyakweri Forest. Over the years and during his tenure as professor and director of Africana Studies at the University of Arizona, Kunnie has pioneered and taught courses in Africana philosophy, history, political economy, geography, psychology, history of religions, racism and social change, and aesthetics of dance. Julian Kunnie is an African, originally from Azania, or known in this imperial world as South Africa. All right, now that was just the vitae. That's just the little, the bio. As you can see, he's very busy, but one of the things we really enjoyed doing this interview with Julian is he's a real warm brother, and you can hear the passion in his voice. It's like also, he should read audiobooks, don't you think?
Yeah, he should.
I mean, his voice is just like very commanding. He's like, y'all just got to hear it. Remember, this is an excerpt, and don't forget, you can get the whole 3 hours if you get a subscription. Mm-hmm. But some of the things we're gonna listen to, we're gonna talk about in this interview. His book is, for one, we recorded the interview on the 55th anniversary of the Sharpeville Massacre in Tanzania, that's South Africa. You don't know nothing but what the imperialists tell you. We were connecting the struggles of Africans in Tanzania all the way to Africans in the diaspora. And we talking, as you can tell, the book is called Pan-African's Working Class Cultural Critical Perspective. We ain't just talking about Pan-Africanism on the continent. It's all Africans, all right? And we also talk about the fallacy of the Freedom Charter, neo-colonialism. And I did say the fallacy of the Freedom Charter, the ANC. That is a neo-colonial party, all right? And also, we're going to be tearing asunder your dreams and hopes and your heroes of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is Uncle Tom. That's all I got to say. I don't know what, I could code it, but y'all thought a Negro in the White House was good. A Negro in the White House was good. And y'all clapped. And hey, that's all I got to say.
They cried and clapped.
They cried, clapped, slung snot. Now I can have a good place on the plantation. Yeah. And Nelson Mandela, I am the same avuncular Uncle Tom Negro. I am Nelson Mandela. I am a neo-colonial sellout. I am integration. White people take everything. Take the land. And you can tell South Africa is still on fire. I'm joking, but I'm not really making it light of the situation. This book is Apartheid Really Dead by Julian Kunnie. Oh my goodness. I mean, this book, all I gotta say is listen to the author. We're gonna get into it with the author. This is part 1 of a 2-part series of a 3-hour interview we conducted on March 21st, the 55th anniversary of the Sharpeville Massacre. Don't worry, Dessalines Dream will come back and get him because you ain't gonna be massacring no more of my people, no more in the world.
That's right.
You heard that? But Dr. Kunnie, we want to thank you. We're gonna do it again, but y'all need to get into this interview. When you hear this interview, you're gonna be like, oh my God, I didn't know that. That's Mandela. Oh, no wonder they made a movie on it. And I just gotta say this. Why in the hell would you think America or anything in this Western-dominated world would celebrate a black revolutionary or somebody that's for black people? Now, if the white world say, oh, Nelson Mandela was such a good Negro, we love him. Have you heard them celebrate George Jackson? Have you heard them celebrate Dessalines?
Hell no.
Have you heard them talk about the Quilombos? No, they want to keep you with Nelson Mandela. And he said he loved everybody. Africa is for everybody except for black folks. But I digress. Let's get into the show with Julian Kunnie and discussing his book, Is Apartheid Really Dead? Pan-Africanist, Working Class, Cultural Perspectives. All right, we are here with Dr. Professor Julian Kunnie, and we are here to talk about this phenomenal book, Is Apartheid Really Dead? Pan-Africanist, Working Class, Cultural, Critical Perspectives. So, how are you doing today, Julian? How you doing?
I'm doing well. Hotep, peace, salam alaikum, and habarigani.
Yes.
The spirit of Pan-Africanism and indigenous peoples. It's good to be here. It's very important to be with conscious African women and men. And I'm very excited to see Conscientization 101, because this is the spirit of young people. I mean, we all are young in one way or another. We're young in the spirit, and it's to see Sister Zari there, the complement. The women is the core, Mother Earth, and the spirit of women. So it's good to see Sister Zari there and the brother James, and to see that you have started an organization to conscientize the world, especially African people, about what's really going on in this world. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely.
You sure are. We so excited. I think my hand is shaking. Let me just go ahead and we have to say this, listening audience, Zari is a very good managing editor, because I probably would have wrote every question in the book. She had to come and say, stop that. It's called an interview with Dr. Kunnie. He's going to answer the questions. You need to shut up. See, I'm going on right now.
It's so much in the book.
It's so much in the book. Okay, let me focus. So, early on in the book, you point to the fact that analysis depicting South Africa, Azania, and I want you to explain Azania, why I say Azania, as a settler colonial republic is not popular. Can you tell the listening audience why this is?
The problem is that we live in a Eurocentric world. We live in an insane world, a world that has been constructed artificially, based on 500 years of European colonization, conquest, subjugation, genocide. And so the images that we have of the world are propagated by this European, so-called Europe. Europe itself is a concept. It's a 200-year concept. In other words, there never used to be Europe, let's say 1,000 years ago. And so we have been forced to imbibe. We have been forced to get drunk. We've been forced to get high on this ideological concept of Europe and the legitimation of Europe and the centrality of, quote, Europe. This tiny, tiny minority of people, of aristocracies coming from Germany, from France, from Britain, from Portugal, from Spain, from Belgium, from Holland, from Italy, and so forth. You know, these people coming together, the aristocracies of those countries that oppressed and colonized and enslaved their own people, then went around the world after stealing gunpowder from the Chinese and turning those into, cannons, these machines that are responsible for mass extermination of peoples in wars. So this whole historical process is vital to us understanding settler colonialism. When we look at places like Azania, when we look at places like Namibia, Zimbabwe, Australia, Aotearoa or New Zealand, and the Americas, from the tip of Alaska to the tip of Chile, there were never so-called European people as indigenous people, as the original caretakers, protectors of the land. See, all of these indigenous peoples around the world in the places that I've mentioned have been decimated, have been annihilated. In the main, if you're looking at Tasmania in the Pacific, for example, virtual total genocide. And that's because these so-called European aristocratic colonizers, these violent marauders, these motley band of criminals, came into these places, dispossessed the indigenous people, enslaved them in their own lands, and then established these republics, whether it's called the United States of America, or Canada, or Brazil, or what they call the Union of South Africa. You know? And I remember there was a brother in Oakland who always used to remind me, Oakland, California, used to say, USA, USA, United States of America, Union of South Africa. You know, this historical settler colonial fraternity between these places. And so we've got to look at the way that the anomaly of settler colonization. In other words, the settler states that were set up in these countries have never been legitimate. They were never authorized by the indigenous peoples of all of these lands. These were European colonial militaries, imperialist economic systems that came in, that unified these European colonial forces, dispossessed the majorities of the indigenous people. In many instances, like in the Western Hemisphere, where we live, exterminated 100 million indigenous people, as Leslie Soko, you were talking about, mentioned. In South Africa, it's very, very similar in terms of, the reason that South Africa is called a settler colonial republic is because the settlers, the white minority, has never been indigenous in terms of their history. Not only that, their culture, the cultures that they brought and imposed on Azania, on the entire African continent, was alien. It was predatory. It was parasitic. It was capitalistic. It was hierarchical. It was male-centered. It was anti-nature, anti-human, exploitative. This is what these settlers have established and then consolidated themselves into, quote, republics, union of white privilege. So now they have established, these countries and saying South Africa, even today, it's officially called South Africa. It's not called Azania or Zania. See, and that's because they're recognizing the African National Congress, the so-called black majority government, the so-called democratic government in South Africa, continues to recognize the illegitimacy of European settler colonization, colonialism in Azania as the basis for the development of an independent African country. Like you were talking about Kwame Nkrumah, South Africa is not independent so long as you have the European settler minority owning the bulk of the land of South Africa. See, so the land continues to be held by the 10% white minority. And within that, the tiny ruling class, tiny white minority capitalist ruling class that has co-opted, a few petty or bourgeois black folk, a few black billionaires and millionaires and so forth, to give legitimacy to the white minority settler colonial system and the capitalist economic superstructure that controlled South Africa. So this is not popular because most people have been brainwashed, whitewashed, indoctrinated into accepting European settler colonialism as a fait accompli, something that is there that can't be changed, can't be eradicated, can't be uprooted. So the United States is a good classic example, right? We see the United States of America as being, quote, a legitimate settler colonial republic, even though the Indians had nothing to do with the establishment of this country, the indigenous people. Similar with Africa. Our people in Africa had nothing to do with the establishment of the South African entity. It is rooted in Eurocentric colonial identity. It is rooted in colonial fragmentation of indigenous Africans. And it is rooted in an economic system that has nothing to do with African history and African cultures and African people. It comes out of Eurocentric imperialism, the destruction of the earth and the destruction of all of the indigenous peoples of the world. And so that is why it's not popular, because people have been brainwashed, have been sanitized, have been kept high, anesthetized by this continued dosage of Eurocentric poison into their minds, to the point that even our African people will say, but don't talk about settler colonialism. When the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania talks about settler colonialism, it's in its political platform, or the Black Consciousness Movement, or the Azanian People's Organization, the Socialist Peoples of Azania, all these Black political formations talk about settler colonialism. People say, no, that's anti-white. See, and we're going to alienate the white minority. So this is why, it's not popular, because it's the truth. And the settler colonialists and the imperialists, they have a monopoly on propagating lies. They have the system. They control the media. They control the publishing houses. They control the whole world in terms of the economy, the military, the social cultures of the world, Hollyweed, right? So this is how the world is. This is why we have come to be forced colonized people. We're not conquered. We colonized because we still resist. Colonized in our mentality, in our culture, in our ways of being. And so we're forced, as enslaved people today, as subjugated people held economic hostage at either, gunpoint, Ferguson, Washington, D.C., New York, Phoenix, Arizona. It's the same kind of thing. Black men being subject to assassination, unarmed black men being shot, open season on black folk. Same kind of system from colonialism. It's the same system of colonization that has taken its toll on the lives of black people. So it's not popular, because that means you have to resist it. See, you have to resist it. That's why Malcolm X said, it's the ballad or the bullet.
All right. Y'all can see now why I like the book. As you can tell from the author, this is, y'all, if you heard me in another podcast, this is kind of the same spirit here. And I just want to kind of reiterate what you said and 100% agree with you. It's not that you suffer racial discrimination over in America. This is colonization 101. When we sit up here and my name is James Stone, do I look like I'm related to the Queen of England? I don't think so. James Stone. And just like in Azania people, we're going to start saying Azania because that's the true name of our homeland down there. And we're going to get into later about the Berlin Conference and stuff like that. But I just wanted to reiterate, just like you said with the colonization, once you relinquish to say, whites, blacks and whites can be here. Yeah, whites, you can be here if you speak an African language, if you can contribute to the benefit of Africa. It's not about all this, this is colonization. Africa is not a Western province. It's not an island, which is what Biko say. It's not a European island off somewhere, no, it's African. If you in America, and you black, you are African. You're not an African American. We didn't start on no plantation, okay? We go back eons. That's all I want to add. Sorry, I know you was over there. You want to say anything?
I agree with everything he said. And a lot of people are so brainwashed that you'll talk about Africa, and the first thing they'll say is, "What about the white people?" And it's
in South Africa, in Azania,
yes, yeah, and it's like, but the white people are invaders, and everybody wants to protect their interests, even when it has, they're not even tied to it. You know what I mean? I've had people say that to me, and I'm like, it's ridiculous. You're not even tied to that. It's just like you said, some kind of brainwashing where that's the first instinct that people have is to ask that question.
Yeah, and Zari is, the whole thing about the way that we have been told that we are racist.
Mm-hmm.
Black people are racist, as you talked about, Zari. This whole mythic ideological notion. The first thing is, we were talking about this at the National Council for Black Studies last week, where I serve on the board and did a couple of papers. And I said, black people can't be racist anywhere in this world. Now, say, oh yeah, in Arizona, they jump up and say, yes, black people can be racist. People are saying, well, you've got white racism, you've got black racism,
That's ridiculous.
So I said, black people can't be racist because we don't have the collective economic, military, social, cultural power to inflict any of our prejudices, either here or in Africa.
Mm.
Or in Africa, because we have white supremacy in this world.
Mm-hmm.
That's why white people go to Africa, because they live like queens and kings. See?
Mm-hmm.
You don't really have poor white people in Africa.
Right. Yeah.
It's funny you say that because it reminds me of Albert Memmi, the colonizer and the colonizer and the colonized, when he said they are mediocre, lower than low trash in the metropole at home in the metro. Then when they go out, then they go out into the settler colony. They go to Algeria or wherever they go. They kings and queens. It's kind of just like, they always trying to get them a black friend or something every now and then, and the black person being, I got a white friend. They know so much. They have long golden hair and stuff. It's like, man, they're a human being just like you. No. They drink the coldest water in the world. But
And he said that when they talk about and romanticize Europe, but they stay in Africa, what I mean? They left Europe because they weren't anything, but then when they come to Africa, Europe is this and that.
It's the same in America. It's the same in America too, because my grandmother's Swedish and da 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 da, and we came over here, and I say, and then they say, oh yeah, but I'm not relinquishing America. You know what I'm saying? And then they always talking about what they're giving the indigenous people. Giving the indigenous. Well, we gave, they traded, when did they relinquish Turtle Island?
No, I know. And this is because we have been brainwashed into believing white supremacy is normal in the world. And that what white supremacy has done in the world has been good for the world. Quote, civilization. Because I said last week, we were laughing about this at the conference too. And I said, if this is what civilization is, then I'm a barbarian. I want to be decivilized.
Holes in the ozone layer and stuff.
Because I want nothing to do with this genocide. Yeah. And so this is not about being anti-white. I am not anti-human. I'm not anti any people, but I am anti-white supremacy. I'm anti-exploitation, and I'm anti-human.
Right.
Okay? So if you begin to set up a system of white supremacy in the world, and you destroy everything from the trees and the birds and the insects to the children and the elders and women with poison of AIDS and disease and chattel slavery and impoverished wages and dispossessing peoples of lands and forcing people to go into mines 3-4 miles down into the earth and have them suffer from asbestosis and all kinds of respiratory diseases and kill them. And I'm against the system that produced that. Every human being ought to be against that. That's white supremacy. That's how it was established. See?
It's funny you mentioned the mines and asbestos coming up with the next question, because Zari, I know you want to get into the materialist aspects of settler colonialism, as opposed to they just do it to us because we black. I'm black. Go ahead, Zari. Ask your question. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Well, yeah, because people believe that apartheid was, Europeans just one day got up and said, oh my God, I hate Africans. Like they just woke up one day and it came into their mind. But that doesn't give you a good analysis of what apartheid is, why white supremacy exists, and the motivation and incentive behind settler colonialism. So, as conscious people, we know that Europe had contradictions in their own culture that they still haven't resolved and they like to put on us.
Yes.
And that's a lot of it is because of a lack of resources, Could you talk about the economic basis behind Europe's initial invasion into South Africa, Azania?
Yes.
With Jan van Riebeck, or that's how you say it?
Yeah, it's Dutch. And again, you see their languages, English is an aristocratic imperialist language.
Yes.
And so we have been forced, all of us, and that's why I said, for Africans in this country, Indians call it Abya Turtle Island from the Iroquois story. United States is a settler colonial entity. And so when you look at the way that we have been forced African American, what is that? American is the antithesis of African.
I'm calm down.
See? You see? So we have to look at the foundations of identity. When the Africans were taken, kidnapped, forced against their will to come here, when those so-called African leaders participated and were bribed into selling Africans, brainwashed and given all these crazy things, just like today, same system, petty bourgeoisie. So, this is a direct continuation of the same system. The Africans jumped off the ships. Women jumped off the ships with their little babies because they didn't want to be thrown into slavery. But the ancestors never left the African people. See, even till today. I mean, what we call African culture, quote, African American culture, is nothing but the ancestors continuing to remind us that our voices, our spirits, our ways of thinking, our ways of seeing, our ways of living together and sharing and eating together go back to our ancestral roots. The ancestors never, ever left us. America signified the evisceration, the cultural destruction, annihilation of our roots to Africa. That's why you'll see that in the film Sankofa, So when you look at the economic basis and the whole, the racism around blackness, the racism around blackness and this whole history, and America, United States of America, white supremacy, white settler colonialism had a lot to do with this ideology. Africa being, quote, a jungle, Africa being, quote, a dark continent, Africa being, quote, a continent of savages, of barbarism, of perpetual wars and destruction, chaos. Okay, and so then Europeans say, well, the Africans were always uncivilized. As what's his name, Bill Connor used to say in the South, the best thing that happened to the Negro in America was that we took him out of barbarism and, savagery in Africa, and we brought him into slavery and civilization. I mean, this was in the heat during the civil rights movement. But these are the myths that were built up, that Africans come out of a history of slavery.
Yes.
That's why names were taken away.
Yes.
The right to worship, the right to be connected to your ancestors, to keep your ancestral name, your language, most importantly. They cut it up. Now you got black people named Washington, right?
I'm proud of it too.
Proud of
Black
you.
people named Jefferson. Down the list, and you can go on and on and on. French names, British names, German names, and so forth. Because that's the process of removing people from our cultural histories, our ancestral heritage, our roots. Then you use the notion of blackness. And you build this whole thing. Obama is a black president, right? So you say now black people have, quote, what? Power, right? So you begin, you got Nelson Mandela there. You got Thabo Mbeki. You got these icons and say, well, you blacks are complaining out there. You black people are always complaining, always discontent. Now we gave you a black president. We gave you your country. You gave you independence.
They gave us.
Still can't get it together. So they've always used blackness as the basis to cover up what? Their real, convoluted, pathological, inhuman, alien ideology. Okay? Which is about, like a vampire, sucking the blood of the people, stripping the land of her natural power and resources, the economics of capitalism, predatory, parasitic, extraction, confiscation of the value of the land, okay? And then, so you begin to use race as the basis for this. Use color to say, well, just like when they said, oh, there's three major races, there's Caucasoid, there's Negroid, and there's Mongoloid. Same kind of nonsense being propagated all over the world today, and people buy into this myth. Even the Chinese buy into this myth because they want to be a part of this whole globalization capitalist system. They all want to have shares in the whole thing. So this whole thing about race itself needs to be demystified because we're all part of the same human race.
Right.
We're all part of the same human race. We come out of the same root. In fact, Africa is the root, the oldest continent of the world. So when you look at this whole basis, the real root, okay, the real reason for the Europeans going into Africa in general is because when you read Kirkpatrick Sale's The Conquest of Paradise, it'll tell you what happened in Europe. By the 14th century, they had destroyed most of their resources.
Right.
The trees, they had no wealth. See, there was no such thing as Europe for one in that time period. What did Europe have? It had nothing.
Ice.
They had feudalism, exploitation of women and children, aristocracy.
Yes.
So they were breeding this incestuous aristocratic classes that would subjugate the majority of the people, as systems of exploitation. There were no, quote, natural resources in Europe. Nothing. In Germany, in Britain, in France, nothing. Okay? So Africa was the place that they knew from way, way back because of their trade. They were trading with Africans, and Africans were trading with Europe and China and the Americas and so forth, booming trade. They knew that there was gold. They knew that there were all kinds of resources, cotton and, corn and wheat and coffee and all that kind of thing. I mean, coffee coming from Ethiopia. That's where the origins are, right? Mm-hmm. So they knew that Africa was a wealthy continent. So what you have to do is you have to pull the wool over people's eyes and say, now you want those resources. Then you say, the problem is there are people living there. So what you do is you say the people are uncivilized. The people are stupid. They don't have mental faculties to figure out things. Their cultures are all backward, primitive. You got the anthropologists, you got the colonizers, you got the missionaries, you got religion, so-called academic anthropology, and you got the military, the colonization. Then you bring the corporations in, see, together the economics of it. But the root is extraction, And so you need to delegitimate the humanity of African people by using this notion of blackness as the race. In fact, I'm going to do another book with some colleagues, hopefully, if we all live for the next few years, the fear of blackness. The fear of blackness, we're talking about that at the conference in LA, because this whole thing about negativity associated with blackness, covering this thing up, covering the notion, this is our physical pigmentation, based on our history and where we are living. This is part of the Creator's design. As Steve Biko said, it's the Creator created us black. It's
right.
Beautiful. Black is beautiful. There's nothing wrong with blackness. There's nothing deficient with blackness. But you begin to use that and propagate that till March 21st, 2015, continue to repeat this nonsense while concealing the real reason, which is the rape of the diamonds, the gold, the vanadium, the platinum, the zinc, the water, the wheat, the corn, the sugar, right? The rape of Azania and the rape of Africa. You conceal that. And you continue to loot the Africans like looting Sierra Leone of diamonds, looting Liberia of rubber, looting the Congo of coltan and vanadium and columbine and tantalum and zinc. looting, and then calling the Africans barbarians, killing each other. You see, the ideology is very successful. Eurocentric white supremacy ideology, capitalism at its root, predatory, just extracting. So that is why we have got to see the real roots. South Africa as it exists is a settler colonial outpost of white supremacy of, quote, Europe, with capitalism as the economic system, racism as the philosophy to justify white supremacy, even though you've got black managers, even black billionaires. White supremacy controlling the whole economic system of South Africa, and the world, the same people.
Columbus sailed the ocean blue, being the cunt he was. The genocide that ensued was a half a millennia, a permanent bloodbath. Today we celebrate the rapists of this fucked up past. Decimate a native leaving in our path. Death and destruction, we kick back and we just laugh. When the culture values dogs more than certain humans, it is certain it will come up with the worst solutions. Decimation, erase a nation and proudly stating nowadays the language has changed, but it's the same shit since the Nazis did within Europe. What Europeans was only supposed to do to natives. The word genocide now carries a little weight with it, but we don't really mean it. A killer is our patriot. Ain't nothing better than a resource theft. Ain't nothing more sexy than black and brown death. We'll tell you what is coming, yeah, we'll tell you what is next, cause we've eaten here before, we're familiar with the chef. What's cooking? The same dish, different dressing. The same priest, different confession, but we'll still give you a blessing, yeah. A baptism in blood, in fact rivers of flood. In fact, give us some grub, we pack triggers a mob, a whole nation. This is empire. The question is, can we aspire to any higher?
We're living through the fall of the empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. And we don't even know what is empire. And we don't even know what is empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. And we don't even know what is empire. And we don't even know what is empire. See, any foundation that is built on greed, raping and pillaging will never succeed. We're living in the age of information. Enslavement, call it colonization. I call it straight piss taking. Call it money illusion, debt making, breathtaking, soul destroying. We're back breaking while they crack whips for fake status. Our society is broken down, so I don't get a loan or credit card. See, that is out of bounds. Freezing all your assets, stopping any bank or draws. Reading to the future, cause the past is showing many flaws. We are not collateral, we are something greater than. Take a stand, let's all take our money out their filthy banks. Mental evolution, no confusion, build communities until my last breath. I won't stop until we all are free. Shouting people's army. See, I know there's something blessed in me, cause when it falls down, I know that there is so much strength in we. We're living through the fall of the empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. And we don't even know what is empire. And we don't even know what is empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. And we don't even know what is empire. And we don't even know what is empire.
Colonize a savage, take what is in the land she inhabits, then we justify it by claiming that we already had it. Cause who needs facts when we got force? Who needs their own minerals? We'll just take yours. We ain't talking about music when we say tours. Rape mothers and mother nature cause they both are whores. Tell our kids every day that crime don't pay, but there's no way we believe the bullshit we say. Cause it's clear as the light of day, the light is lighting up the way of those who trade in graves, cause death does pay. Yeah, supply arms to both sides in the fight. And if you ain't frightened, you ain't paying attention and you're enlightened. I know something that we ain't learned, that yeah, maybe hell is real and one day they'll burn, but in the meantime, sure they'll earn till the empire's done and another one gets its turn.
We're living through the fall of the empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. And we don't even know what is empire. And we don't even know what is empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. And we don't even know what is empire. And we don't even know what is empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. And we don't even know what is empire. And we don't even know what is empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. We're living through the fall of the empire. and we don't even know what is meant tight. And we don't even know what is meant tight.
It's over the fool. It's over.
That's why, books like yours are so important. If you only knew what we really lost, and another reason why books like yours are so important is because it makes no distinction between the continental African and the African who finds themselves, that they are some kind of physiological transmogrifications, like they a gremlin that ate chicken after midnight and nothing. We the same people, and that's the problem we got on the continent. Cote d'Ivoire, some people think they French. You know what I'm saying? I ain't no African. I'm a Frenchman. Why we? And we over here, I'm an African American. I came with George Washington. I don't know what they on Sally Hemings. They don't know. We don't know what we over here. I know what I am. Shoot, but I just want to move on to the next question. The next question. When people look at South Africa, Azania today, the Western media portrays it as a place of racial harmony, and the personification of this is of the late Nelson Mandela, who I like to assign the adjective to of avuncular. Whenever I think of Nelson Mandela, he's very avuncular, very happy Negroish. I'm sorry. And I can just recall from the book, one of the things Nelson Mandela said, soon as he got fresh out on bail, out of jail from Robben Island, page 162 of your phenomenal book, Nelson Mandela said, we wanted to make white people feel safe. He just got out of jail, y'all. He wanted to make white people feel safe, and he said he appreciated the contribution and developments the white folks made to the country. Now, that's some trouble right there when somebody get out of jail, and then the first thing he say, and he also said, I'm against white exploitation and black exploitation. Yeah. I was like, what the hell is you, Negro, you just got it. Anyway.
Why all these contributions putting us?
All right, at this point in the recording, we experienced some technical difficulties. The last part you heard was Zari making the comment, with all the contributions they keep giving us, how come the cute contributions always end up putting us in jail? And Julian began to answer my question by starting to talk about Chiwenzu's book, The West and the Rest of Us, White Predators, Black Slavers, and the African Elite. So when we pick back up, he's going to start off with Chiwenzu's book, answering the question I just asked. Yeah, we're good now.
Okay.
Chinwezu, I'm sorry.
Yes, Chinwezu, The West and the Rest of Us. And, the subtitle is a bit heavy.
Predators and...
White predators, black slavers, and the African elite. And people don't like to read that book because, the title is heavy. And the book is even heavier than the title.
It is.
Because it's really talking about how this world came about. And so when you look at a situation like, this colonialism of the 21st century, even Martin Luther King Jr. said, nobody surrenders freedom. In other words, nobody can give an oppressed people their freedom. The oppressor, the colonizer, can't give the colonized their freedom. The colonized has to take it from the colonizer. Right? Frantz Fanon, Lemmy, Césaire, Hugo, Walter Rodney, same, Sojourner Truth. You have to take your freedom.
That's right.
You have to struggle for it. So when you look at the way that Nelson Mandela, right in the aftermath of his release from prison after 27 years of incarceration, talking about, appreciating what the white minority has done. This was for consumption by capital, the capitalist system. In other words, this was to reassure the entire white supremacist capitalist system in the world that their, quote, investments in South Africa were going to be safe for a long time. See, no care about the people. And it's kind of an irony when you're talking about South Africa being a haven, the quote, rainbow nation, and black and white living together in, this beautiful heavenly celestial sphere. I mean, goodness, when you look at the reality of how black people live in South Africa today, I mean, it is so spiritually outrageous. It is so culturally shameful. And I'm saying this as somebody who knows the land and who's been there many, many times. And it's just shocking that we can have Africans living in a country like that today. Living in these huge townships, oftentimes the bulk of which are resemble slums. People living in shacks. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. Children living on the street. Thousands of children living on the street. Homeless in our own homeland. Even today, in 2015. And then these folks talking about racial harmony in the country, harmony for the gold mines. But even there, we know that the people who make South Africa so wealthy are the brothers who go deep down into the mines every single day and who are protesting, and who were demanding a livable wage. I mean, these are the brothers, these are the African people that keep Azania so wealthy, who don't have their wives with them, don't have their children with them, living in these overcrowded single-sex hostels.
You talk about that, yes.
See? So when you look at this, you see, this is where the propaganda machine is working 24/7, all the time, constantly turning in our minds and propagating this image of, quote, racial harmony. South Africa had the most peaceful democratic elections ever.
One man, one vote.
Pardon?
One man, one vote.
One man, one vote. Concealing the reality of colonization, which is occupation by a white settler colonial minority, occupation by the large transnational corporations which have nothing to do with Africa, the mining companies, Lonmin, Anglo-American, Rio Tinto Zinc, PHB Billiton, Ashanti Gold, Consolidated Goldfields, all these European operations that are looting the African continent, Tanzania in particular, the Congo too. So neocolonialism is the system under which we live today.
Right.
In other words, we think we are free. We think we're independent. We think we're living in a democratic nation, right?
That's right.
Democracy. We can vote. We used to be colonized, but we thank God we're free, free at last, right? Free at last. Thank God Almighty we're free at last. So when you look at this whole notion of, quote, freedom, neocolonialism works 24/7 in concealing our conditions of perpetual economic colonization, subjugation, servitude, domination, right? So it's a deeply entrenched ideology that makes us believe something else, that pulls the wool over our eyes, that feeds us with the poison, injects us with the drug, illusory drug, right? That we have been accorded the right of self-determination. We're free to determine our own destiny, right? We're free to determine our own destiny because we have power. We have black power. We have economic power. We control. Neocolonialism is the stage, is the process today, which imperialism, as Kwame Nkrumah so brilliantly talked about in his book, Neocolonial,
the last stage.
The last stage of imperialism. See, because he understood what was going to happen. The fact that you had these black managers, Madiba, Nelson Mandela, or Jacob Zuma, it doesn't matter. You just change the figures. you use these charismatic Obama. You know, he has an African name. See, and that's the whole thing that goes with the mix. It's good to have an African name and good to have an African name in the White House. Think about it. Why would they have an African name in the White House? Unless you can milk the capitalist cow. See, until the cows come home. Because you use that as the basis to continue to do what you are doing more efficiently and more securely under, quote, a black president, whether it's Madiba, Mandela, or Obama. But you continue to do the same things in terms of war, in terms of extraction, in terms of exploitation of workers and women and everything. You're engaging in the same processes. And most importantly, you don't even know that you're colonized under neocolonialism because you still have the Eurocentric curriculum operating. You still have the same standards in education, English as the lingua franca, or Afrikaans as the lingua franca of schools, and you have the same competitive Eurocentric educational curriculum operating in an African country. So you're colonized. Your aspirations are still Europe. Your aspirations are what belong to the citadels of white supremacy, materialism, exploitation, a bigger house, a bigger car, right? All these material things that have come about through slavery. So you still aspire to get those things, but you say that you're free. You don't know you're colonized. That's the devil genius, the evil of neocolonialism. And that is why we as black people, we as colonized people, need to understand how nefarious this system is, how convoluted, how perverted, how pathological it is in the way that it psychologically operates on our minds and, on our spirits, and denudes the energy of our children, because they're working on our children from day one.
They sure are.
To colonize our children into making them believe that they're something else than who they really are as African people, and making them feel ashamed of Africanity, of blackness. See? And so to embrace this petty bourgeois form of blackness, you talked about the African Union, that kind of thing, all this bourgeois form of black middle class identity, which plays the role of manager, beneficiary from exploitation.
I just saw a documentary on Amazon, something called The Myth of the Rainbow Nation or something, and it talks about Zuma and Becky, and then it kind of goes into Chris Hani. And on our website, we actually have one of the last interviews with Chris Hani. But a lot of people talk about, just like they always talk about with Obama, Obama is not fulfilling what he said on his campaign trail. Obama said, I'm a capitalist. I'm going to do my thing.
He never said nothing.
I'm going to do this. You're the one who projected this progressive, and I don't even know what Africans mean when they say progressive. I'm progressive.
Right. What does that mean?
Well, you for yourself? Are you idiot? But anyway, when I look at the, one of the when people say, they just not following the Freedom Charter. Well, you gave a good corrective to the Freedom Charter. Why don't you talk about what the Freedom Charter, what type of freedom it really was, and related to what we was talking about in neocolonialism?
Yes. This whole thing about the Freedom Charter and the Rainbow Nation, and this is, it's. It's amazing to see how the United States continues to have a bearing on South Africa. It's just, they even have a talk about affirmative action there. And so this whole thing about the Freedom Charter says the first thing is South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. Okay? And that's the basis for it. And then it's a blueprint sort of a democratic nation, sort of like the U.S. Constitution in some sense. And we know how strong the U.S. Constitution is in terms of protecting anybody's rights, let alone black people or indigenous people's rights in this country. So, when you look at the Freedom Charter as the basis for the African National Congress, the ruling party in South Africa, it is very clear that there is no real program of economic justice, particularly in issues of land, because when we talk economy, we have to talk land. See, it's not just money.
Right.
We've got, you got $1 million in the bank, and, you spend it next week, you're on the street.
That's right.
Okay? You own a house, but the bank really owns the house because you're paying the mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even own the land on which the house is. So, and this is why it's so important for all of us to understand when we're talking about, South Africa belonging to all who live in it, and the basis of the Freedom Charter from that gathering in Kliptown in 1955, it is a romanticized notion based on, quote, this rainbow nation. It's, as one of the brothers from Kenya was saying, I mentioned this in my forthcoming book, he says there's, quote, two, quote, tribes. We say there's two people, there's two classes, there's two races in South Africa, and that is the rich and the poor, and the rich are principally white, overwhelmingly white, and the poor are entirely black.
Mm-hmm.
See, so one has to look at the stark contradictions that emerge out of the basis of the Freedom Charter, which says that the white minority has a legitimate ownership of the land.
Yes.
That is how they continue to monopolize ownership of the land based on the Freedom Charter. The other question you have to look at is the mines. That's why this whole thing about, the Freedom Fighter Party, the Freedom Fighters in South Africa, led by Julius Malema, there's been this whole, lambasting of Malema because the party says South African mines should be owned by the people, by the black people.
Yes.
It should be nationalized. It should be owned by the people. And the problem is that runs against the grain of the Freedom Charter because it says it's a free country, quote, free market, freedom of opportunity. Okay? All of these things fall under the auspices of the Freedom Charter. So, and this is why people have to be really smart. You have to be really analytical and understand that these are all ideological ploys, that maintain the same economic structures. In other words, the Freedom Charter essentially provides for an expansion, an inclusion of black people within the former white supremacist apartheid system. It's an extension of the apartheid charter in some sense, because it's saying we all are equal. Everybody's equal in South Africa. Everybody has equal rights in South Africa, but the land belongs to everybody, to black and white.
Yes.
Whereas the white people acquired the land, forcibly dispossessed 3.5 million people, through wars of attrition, wars of genocide, wars of extermination, subjugation, and conquest. And so those contradictions can never be dealt with in the Freedom Charter.
Okay, everybody, that's where we're leaving it for now. But if you want to finish listening to this interview, you already know what to do. If you want to listen to it in its entirety, go to conscientization101.com or c101magazine.com and subscribe today. And if you subscribe today, you will not only have access to this interview in its entirety, but you will have access to all of C101's interviews, which are hot fire, by the way. Okay, you don't want to miss it. Like, you don't want to just listen to the podcast and be like, oh, I got it. No, because you're going to miss a whole lot if you don't get the entire interview. Okay, so just go in to the website, check out the subscription benefits, look at the full details, and check it out. Consider it. Cool. Another thing, you'll be supporting 100% independent media, okay? We always say the media, wants to spin things and blah, blah, blah. So let's support independent media so we can continue doing this and we can continue to provide the real information that's not in La La Land, okay? So, this episode has featured sounds from Akala, and that is his song Get Educated from Knowledge is Power Mixtape Volume 1. We also featured music from Chairman Math, that is Math, M-A-F, as in full, fence, feature. F, as I was trying to say F as in feather. His song Stillwater from his Dusted EP, and we featured more music from Akala. The song is Fall of the Empire featuring Amy True from his album Knowledge is Power Volume 2. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter. We always say this, so go ahead, check us out on Twitter at Conscien1, CONSCIEN1, on Facebook at Conscientization 101, and Instagram at C101 Editors. And we want to thank Julian Kunnie very much for his time. We really enjoyed talking with you, and that's it. That's a wrap.
Am I then to do nothing, feel nothing, be still?